Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Welcome to the show.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
The pleasure is all mine, Alan. Thank you very much for accepting our invite. And today we are going to talk about one of your areas of expertise, which is media skills. We're going to talk about essential media skills. And I'd like to start with one video that I found on your website recently, which I found really interesting. And in that video, you talk about the difference between the rule of 6 and the rule of 1, which is very much related to effective communication. Of course, the rule of 6, you are talking about the fact that here in the UK, we've got this limitation at the moment. Would you like to tell our listeners more about this idea of the rule of 1 in communication?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, people who receive communication are always individuals. I've never been a group of people. I've never been a group of 6 or 3 or anybody else. I've always been me. And I like to receive communication which is addressed to me. So whenever I'm working with clients, whether it's media or speaking, but particularly media, I always say in their mind's eye, have one person in mind. One person to whom they speak, one person with whom they communicate. It's how all newsreaders work. It's how all presenters to camera on media work. It's how all radio presenters work. They have one person they talk to. Quite often, it's a person they know well. It could be their spouse, their parent, their child, but somebody that they have in their mind's eye that they talk to. And it changes your language. It changes your vocabulary. For example, you would never say, how many of you have heard this tune before? You'd say, I wonder if you've heard this tune before. Because then we receive it as an individual, because we can opt out of being part of a group. We don't have to be in that group. But if somebody's talking to us as an individual, we know they're talking to us.
Much more powerful. And also, Alan, I wanted to ask you, now, if we think about dealing with the media in general, what are some of the key mistakes you see most people and companies make when dealing with the media?
How long have you got, Andrew? How long have you got?
Maybe the top 3.
The top 3, I think the first one is being unprepared. And I think being unprepared is unforgivable. Because even if you have only a few minutes notice of an interview, that gives you time to go and prepare, to get ready, and preparing your core message, preparing what you're going to say, deciding how you're going to present the information. That's absolutely crucial. To walk into an interview unprepared, without any real clue what's going to happen, is potentially very damaging to your reputation. And preparation doesn't take long. And preparation is about preparing your message. It's about thinking how you're going to express it and who you're going to express it to. So I think lack of preparation is the first one. The second one is trying to get away with something that isn't quite true. And that is trying to cover up something, trying to present a half-truth as though it's the full truth. In other words, thinking it's only a few minutes, I'll probably get away with it. And I've heard people do this time and time again. And the fascinating thing about this is that it's not that actually kills you, it's the subsequent cover-up. Because as soon as you say something which somebody can prove is untrue, or at least not fully true, there's follow-up. And you've got to try and backtrack or fill in or explain how you were mistaken or misspoke or whatever you want to say. So the answer is not to do it in the first place. So preparation is one, not telling the truth is another. And the third thing is being absolutely clear what you know and what you don't know. So it's never to speculate. And certainly if people are placed in a position where they're commenting on a crisis, for example, the obvious question is, how did this happen? What was the cause? And people wanting to be helpful may try and speculate. And that's really a bad idea. So if you ever speculate about something, you don't know whether you're telling the truth. You're not deliberately lying, but you don't know whether you're telling the truth. So it's preparation, being truthful, and never speculating.
And one of the things you said when it comes to preparation is you need to be prepared in terms of what's your core message.
Yes.
And this is one of the things I really like about your work, Alan, because when it comes to, it could be a TV appearance, an interview, could be on radio. Often a lot of people immediately think about the way we communicate a message, which is one element, it's important,
Sure.
but we shouldn't forget the core message itself. And you do talk about the importance of having a core message. Alan, based on your experience, what are some of the key characteristics of a great message?
Okay, I mean, a great core message, as I say, is really important. I'm glad you've picked up on that, and I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. Firstly, it's got to be simple. If a core message is too complicated, then the audience won't understand it. And there's no point delivering a message that people won't understand. So it's got to be simple, and it's got to be relevant. So it's got to be a message which makes sense at the moment. And then thirdly, it's got to be of some value to the people who are receiving it. If I receive a message which I think, well, I don't know what that's going to do for me, so I'm going to forget it immediately. So if it's simple, if it's relevant, and it has value to the audience, then you've got a very good chance of delivering it. But more than that, you need to repeat it several times. So you need to make sure that you get your core message in early, certainly get it in late, and if you can, work it in maybe in the same words or maybe slightly different words as the interview flows through. Some people think they're in an interview in order to simply answer questions from the interviewer, just like we're doing now, just like I'm doing now. In fact, I'm here to make my point, which is that core messages have got to be simple, relevant, and of value.
And you also said that repetition, if done correctly, is good in communication.
It is, and some people think, well, I better not say that, I've said it before. But we do need to repeat. And if you look at advertising or marketing, for example, that's all about repetitive messaging. It's about repetitive, simple messaging, so that at some point you might see a product or hear about a service and you think, I know what that means. I know what that's about. Without having to see or hear the advert again, you immediately associate that with the simple, clear, valuable message you've heard before.
And I like the fact that you say that one of the characteristics should be simplicity. The message has to be simple. I don't know about your experience. I know that you are also a professional public speaker. Now, at Ideas on Stage, we help our clients create and deliver powerful presentations. And one of the mistakes I see so often is that as presenters, we know so much about a subject, and often we are so close to it that we think that everything is important, right? And so we think that we need to communicate everything. Isn't that true? Which goes against the idea of simplifying the message.
It does, and you're absolutely right, and well done for the work that you do at Ideas on Stage, because it is about getting people to remember what you've said. And if you're trying to deliver too many messages or too complex a message, and I always say to people, I'm sure you say the same thing, one message per speech. There's no point in trying to deliver a number of messages. If you want to deliver a lot of messages, that's a training session. And you give people a manual and you give them some notes to take away, and that's training. But a speech is about one pure message that people will take away. And for me, the test of a really good speech, a really good piece of communication, is that somebody who's heard the communication can then transfer it. They can repeat it to somebody a week later or a month later because they've remembered the message. They won't remember the words. They won't remember the stories necessarily, but they remember the message, and that means the communication has worked.
And if you try to tell them 20 messages, then it is unlikely that they remember.
None.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll remember none at all.
Alan, let's also talk about TV appearances.
Sure.
in particular. Do you have any, and it could be a general question, but any particular tips for TV appearances? It could be anything. It could be from a message perspective or from a delivery perspective. What comes to mind?
Yes, and TV is different, but of course we're all on TV these days, aren't we? Because we're on Zoom and we're on Skype and we're on Microsoft Teams and we're all on TV, and we're all turning into TV presenters. And I think that the key things that apply to TV also apply to these online systems, and that is don't have anything which is distracting the viewer. So if you want to turn up in a brightly coloured tie, if anybody wears ties these days, I don't know them, but if you want to do that, or if you want to wear sparkly jewelry, or you want to have an extraordinary background or something like that, that's going to distract from your message. So the first thing to think about is, am I wearing something or using something which is going to distract from my message? Also, the same rules apply to TV as apply to radio, and that is, you've got to be interesting. You've got to have something. You've got to have a style and approach, and you've got to look as though you're the sort of person that somebody would want to chat to. I mean, there are some people who will deliver in a very robotic voice, and you think, well, I've turned off. I'm sorry, I don't want to know. And there's a lot of talk about body language as well. People talk about body language on stage and body language on television and so on. And I think if you use your hand, I use my hand, you probably do, use your hands naturally as part of emphasis, as a gesture, carry on doing it. Because it's about being natural and authentic on television. And I think too many people they tense up on television. We've all seen this, haven't we? They tense up, their shoulders go back, their head goes down, their voice goes more quiet because they haven't got a fully extended windpipe and so on. And the thing is, it's very difficult to tell people this, but you got to relax. And the only way that you learn to do that is by repetition, by doing it over and over again, and just getting used to it. And bearing in mind that you're on television, you're often talking to the interviewer and never to the camera. And I think one key thing about television, which is particularly important, is you never talk to the camera unless you're the presenter. And I've seen people do that. I've seen people in interviews, they will talk to the interviewer and then they'll turn for emphasis, they think, to the camera, whatever camera happens to have their light on. Big mistake.
It doesn't work. Interesting. And Alan, you also started talking about body language, for example, hand gestures. By the way, I'm Italian, but I work in the UK, and I always tell my clients, you should, when it comes to hand gestures, you should speak Italian with your hands, because they say that we use them a lot. And is there, from a body language perspective, anything else, maybe any other tips in terms of either, I don't know, posture or eye contact? What else?
Yes, I mean, eye contact is important, right? If you're presenting to camera, eye contact with the camera is important. That's a universal rule. In terms of posture, we often, when I'm talking to people, I'm media training people, I often say, remember the phrase BBC. And they say, you mean British Broadcasting Corporation? I say, no, bottom back in chair. So I tell people, put your bottom back in your chair like that, and then lean slightly forward, because it's an alert gesture. It means you're taking an interest, you're leaning slightly forward to listen to the interviewer, to take in what they're saying, and you look comfortable. If you slouch or slump or lean backwards or cross your legs or look bored, that comes across. We communicate a lot with our body. I mean, there's that nonsense that only 7% of communication is words, the old Moravian paradox that none of us believe. But nevertheless, body language is still important, and people can sense from how you appear whether or not you're engaged, whether you're interested, in fact, whether you believe what you're saying. And that's pretty critical too.
Yeah. And you also briefly talked about radio yes. Interviews. Are there any differences, though, if you think about radio appearances? Is there anything in particular that we should consider in that kind of scenario?
Yes, I would say so, because on radio, obviously you're a voice. You're just a voice. And there's a wonderful story, which I don't know is true or not, but I like to relate it. And it was there was an old comedian. There was a comedian troupe called the Marx Brothers years ago who used to make films. And the Groucho Marx, who was the leader of that group, was visiting a school and once said to a young person, apparently, do you prefer television or radio? And the little boy said, I prefer radio because the pictures are better. And because on radio, we create the images and we transmit those images, and the people who are listening recreate those images or create their own images in their head, and that becomes memorable. So I think on radio, it's good to think about, what image am I creating? How am I building a picture, literally, that the audience can see, again, in their mind's eye, which I refer to quite a lot. So I think your language on radio tends to be a little bit more graphic and descriptive and literally colourful. Whereas on television, because you can demonstrate something, or they can show a VT or something like that, you don't need to do that. But on radio, you need to think about, how am I creating pictures in the audience's head?
Yeah, and because you talked about the importance of voice, of course, which is the main thing we have, or maybe the only thing we have on radio, I think it's also the other way around, because often, that you know this better than me, Alan, but even on TV, of course, we also have ourselves. So it's not, voice is not the only tool we have, but it is still very important. There is not in the UK, but a very famous broadcaster and TV host in Italy who says that actually you don't watch TV, you listen to it.
True.
And that's because he's talking about the power of voice, the way you can get your message across more effectively simply by using your voice differently.
I think that's very well put, Andrea, very well put, because there are people who I will watch on television, but actually it's really the voice. We have some wonderful, globally, we have some wonderful presenters, and some of the people who used to present news or current affairs programs have very distinctive voices, and I think it's the voice that we respond to. I think that's a very telling phrase to say that we listen to TV because we do, and quite often television is more of an interrupt type experience. Unless we're watching a very good football match, for example, then we're not so much engaged in the pictures. You're absolutely right.
Are you just, these are just out of curiosity, it has nothing to do with this interview, but because you mentioned football, are you a football fan, Alan?
I am. Unfortunately, I'm a Fulham fan, so I'm not having a very good season at the moment. But it's one of those things. Yes, I've always loved football. I've been following football since I was 6 years old, which is a very, very long time ago.
Me too. I'm a Juventus fan, and also this year we didn't do really well this year.
It's the fate of being a football fan, isn't it? That you have a club that you follow through the good times and the bad times, and the good times are great, and the bad times you just shrug your shoulders and say, well, maybe next year.
Exactly, maybe next year, and we've got the Euros coming up in a few days. Let's see how it goes. Yeah, right. Also, Alan, panel discussions.
Yes.
Again, if you think about the panelists, it could be, if you have any tips for those who are asked questions, they are panelists, or maybe any tips for the moderator, the host. Sure,
of course. I mean, as I've been both, I'm sure you have too, as a moderator and a panel member, as many of us are. And I think, again, the moderator has to do quite a lot of preparation. They have to know something about each of the panelists. They might have to do an introduction. They might have to do a summary. And the moderator is really a tough job. It's like being the MC of an event. You've got to be on all the time. You've got to listen to everything. You've got to look out for things that might happen. And you've got to be able to step in if something needs to be done. So I think that the moderator job it's a bit like a meerkat. You're up all the time and you're watching what's going on and you're reacting to everything. The panel member also has to react. And I think it's very, very important for panel members not to switch off either physically or mentally when other people are talking. And I think that is a temptation sometimes. And I've seen it happen, I'm sure you have on panel shows as well, where there's a person delivering a response and the camera will go to another member of the audience, another member of the panel who's reacting, perhaps in quite a bad way. And that can be very damaging to that person. So if you're a panelist who's not speaking, just sit there quietly and listen, and don't give away by your facial gesture or an aside, a comment that you make, that you're annoyed, upset, or irritated by whatever's being said. So you need to be aware of that, and also be aware that you might need to respond suddenly. So think, what might you say if you're asked what's your response to that? In other words, you've got to be alert, but in a different way to the way the moderator is alert.
The moderator, yeah. And in preparation for this conversation, Alan, I asked our audience whether they had any specific questions for you. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that came up, which I found interesting, was always thinking about panel discussions. Mm-hmm. The question was, do you have any tips for coming up with good, deep questions? And again, it could be either as a host, as a moderator, or sometimes that person told me, sometimes I attend as a panel member and I'm asked like if I have any questions, because that could be useful for the moderator to know.
Yes, of course.
So any tips for coming up with great questions?
I mean, two points there. So I think one is if the panel member themselves is going to give a question to the moderator in advance, in case nobody asks a question. Clearly, the obvious thing there is to have somebody ask a question which delivers your core message as a response. So you have in mind what you want to say. It may have happened in the debate already. It doesn't matter. You can say it again. And if you're talking about coming up with great questions in general, I mean, it's the rules of what, when, why, how. What, when, why, how. Those are the sorts of questions that are going to be asked. I always think it's important to put yourself in the frame of mind of the people who are watching. What would the people who are watching ask if they were there? And I think the role of the moderator is very much to be the channel or the conduit of the audience. So they really need to understand the audience. They need to know what sort of people they are. They need to know what their interests are. They need to know what drives them and so on, because they are there to ask the questions that the audience would have asked. And I often think it's interesting when you see, for example, political interviewers on television, and they can be quite aggressive in asking questions of politicians, which is probably a good thing. And sometimes people say to me, well, you know, they've got very strong opinions, or they're being quite nasty, or they're being unfair, they're probably biased the other way. And I say, no, they're asking the questions the audience would ask. So I think as a moderator, you've got to kind of lift yourself above the debate, not take sides, but press the people on the panel to deliver responses to the questions that would be asked if some member of the audience was to walk in.
And Alan, this is again very much connected to what we do, because it's not, the idea of putting ourselves in the audience's shoes is of course very relevant here, but also when it comes to, let's say, public speaking in general. Yeah. We always tell our clients, when you give a presentation, it's their presentation. It's always the audience's presentation, not yours. And it's, yeah.
I mean, I think it's any form of communication only works if the audience receives it and understands it, and gets some value from it. There is no point in just declaiming a message that people don't get or don't appreciate. So yes, obviously your first consideration is always going to be, what is the benefit the audience going to get? Are the audience going to understand this? And how is the best way that I can communicate? How can I transmit a message that they will be able to unpack and make some use of, have some value from? And it's not, you know, we all say, I know you say that, I know, and I say that too. It's not always easy. It's not always easy, because a lot of people who present, whether it's on stage or on camera or on radio, they think they've got something so important inside them that they've got to tell people, whether they're interested or not. And that's a very difficult hurdle for some people to get over.
Absolutely. And Alan, let's go back to, it's not exactly body language, but it's in a way it's connected, because I would like to talk about the visual impact in general, your personal appearance. And in your book, which by the way, you've wrote a number of books.
Yes.
Here in preparation for this conversation, I read The Pocket MediaCoach.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, highly recommend it. It's a great book if you're interested in these ideas, The Pocket MediaCoach. And in that book, you include an anecdote, an example of, I guess you may remember it, of a tragic, I think it was a shipping tragedy.
It was the Zeebrugge disaster.
Exactly, a significant loss of life. And now you say in the book that you use that example in one of your courses, and I don't know whether you can explain it here without showing the video, but what happens there and how is that connected to our personal appearance?
Yeah, the connection there, and this is, I don't want to put somebody in the dock, but this is out in the public domain, so it's fair enough to say. I won't name the person involved, but it was, as you say, a tragic incident. It was a car ferry, the Herald of Free Enterprise, which unfortunately the bow doors were left open, water came in, it overturned, and there was loss of life. And what happened was that the owner of the shipping company was obviously looked for. They wanted to do an interview with them, and they found them at a cricket match. On a Sunday afternoon, and they had a trilby on and a cravat, and they had a cigar which they put behind at least put the cigar behind their back, but the smoke was curling over their shoulder, and they, even though they said the right things, they didn't look right. They looked like, you know, the typical image of a fat cat business owner. I'm not saying that they were, but they looked like that. And what I've done on training courses, I've played that video with the sound off. And I've said to people, what do you think? And they said, well, that's a person, couldn't care. They were no interest at all. They couldn't care. And what an awful, callous person. And then I play it with the video off and the sound on, and the expression, the comprehension people have is completely different. they say, well, that was really said the right things and expressed his sympathy and so on. And then you put the two back together and people are a bit confused because the words made sense, but the visuals did not. And there are all sorts of examples like that where people don't think for a moment about how they look. I mean, there was another great example, I think I mentioned in the book, about Richard Branson when he was visiting the scene. Sorry, it's a disaster, but it was a train crash in the north of England, in the Lake District. A person had been killed, and I think several people had been injured and gone to hospital. He turned up as the MD of Virgin Rail, and he asked to be photographed, to be filmed in front of the crash. So behind him was the crashed train rolled down the embankment. And he asked the cameras to direct themselves at the crash. And he said, look at that, that's a disaster. And he said, I'm so sorry, I'm going to visit people in hospital immediately. And he said, but if you look at the carriages, not a single window has broken. Not a single carriage has deformed because we build our trains to 3 times the safety strength required by British Rail. Not only that, our driver was a hero. He stayed in his cab fighting to keep the train on the tracks, suffered 2 broken legs, an absolute hero. So our driver was a hero, and look at the train, it's safe. And the interesting thing was, after that, they had their record number of ticket sales for any day in their history on the day after a fatal train crash. And it just shows how things can be turned around by a visual in terms of how they're presented. And I think that's an extraordinary example of how those things work.
And again, it's connected to the world of public speaking and presentations. We always say that there are 3 key skills you need to have if you really want to improve your abilities as a presenter. One is, as you said, Alan, your message. You need to be able to develop a core message, an interesting message. Another thing which might be optional, and that's connected to the visual side of things. If you're using slides, for example, you need to be able to use them effectively. You don't have to use them all the time, but if you do, we need to avoid the typical death by PowerPoint that we see all the time. And then also delivery. You also need to be able to deliver your message in a way that's comfortable and convincing. And Alan, let's go a bit deeper when it comes to, you touched on it when we talked about panel discussions already, but let's go a bit deeper to answering questions.
Okay.
It could be during a panel discussion, or it could be in a presentation. You are the presenter, you ask a question, or the audience asks a question.
Yep.
So answering questions. First of all, what are some of the key mistakes you see?
When you're answering questions, I think some of the key mistakes, again, I talked about them before, which is trying to speculate or trying to tell a half truth as a whole truth. I think most importantly, when you're answering questions, you've got to be clear what the question's about. And I think sometimes people will try and anticipate a question. They think, I know what's coming. Particularly if it's a member of the audience who's asking a question and you know them and you think, I know what they're here for. Which means you try and formulate the answer in advance, and you may even start your answer before they finish their question. You run over the last couple of words of their question with your answer. Again, a really bad idea. You need to absorb the question, understand what it's about, give yourself 3 or 4 seconds pause before you start to answer. That's plenty of time for you to think about a response. So never anticipate. Don't think I know what this is going to be about, because that could lead you down the wrong pathway. Another thing is, don't try and pretend you know something that you don't. I talked about not speculating before, and this is something that people often get a little bit upset and agitated because they think, I don't know the answer to that, and they don't want to admit their ignorance. They feel they should know. They feel they should be the most expert person in the room, and I don't know about you, but I'm rarely the most expert person in a room. Even when I'm on a stage in front of a bunch of people on my topic, I don't think I'm necessarily the most expert person in the room. But I know what I know, and I know what my particular take on that is. And I think if people get into their head that they're there to deliver their take on something, their view of the world, and it may not be the same as somebody else's, but it's theirs, and that's what people have come to hear. So you've got to be very, very authentic in terms of that. And then you've got to be very, very careful to be respectful of the questioner. And sometimes that's difficult too, because the question can be harsh. It can be hurtful. But you always smile, you thank them for the question, and you answer it as best you can. And I've got one technique, which we might get onto, which I think is the best technique I've ever come across for handling a difficult question without getting upset and without upsetting anybody else.
Which is?
It's called negative rephrasing or negative paraphrasing. And what it is, it allows you to rephrase a question without. Well, I'll give you the example. It's a 3-stage process. I'll give you the example. You've probably come across this before, but you know, people who listen may not. So you get a very aggressive question, and the first thing you say is, let me understand exactly what you're saying. Let me understand exactly what you're saying. I should have said neutral rephrasing, by the way, not negative rephrasing. It's neutral rephrasing is what I mean. So firstly, you say, let me understand what you're saying. And then you rephrase the question in a neutral form. So if somebody had said to me, Alan, that's very good, but your facts are wrong. You're talking a load of nonsense, and you haven't been doing this long enough to know what you're talking about anyway. So I would come back, and first thing I would say was, let me understand exactly what you're asking here. You're questioning my experience, my expertise, and the validity of me being here on stage. And they would nod in agreement because they're hearing the aggressive question in their head. And then the third thing is I explain in a neutral way what the answer to the question is. My experience is this, my expertise is that, the reason I'm here is I've been asked by the organisers, etc., etc., etc. So ask, can I clarify, neutralise the question while you're clarifying it, and then explain positively what the answer is. The audience has now heard a neutral question in your rephrasing, and they've heard a positive response. The person who asked the question has still heard the aggressive question in their head. If they come back, then you've got to say, well, I'm sorry, I've dealt with that. You know, we'll move on. So the thing about that technique, you can't use it over and over again. Yeah. Because people will realize it's a technique, and you can't say, let me understand what you're saying again. Because people will, does he not understand anything? And the second point about that is never use it with your partner or your children. If I made that mistake, they know what I do. And if I say, let me understand exactly what you're saying, they say, Dad, I know what you're doing.
You know what, Alan, this is by the way, this is a great technique. Thank you for sharing it with our listeners. And there are many other techniques that work really well in, let's say, in a coaching situation. And I've tried in the past to apply some of them with my wife, and you're right, it doesn't work.
You can forget doing it at home. That's the point.
Yeah. But that's a great technique. And also, Alan, I wanted to ask you something else about question, because I just want to emphasize again some of the things you mentioned before, because you touched on the idea that today, so far, we've been talking about communication in general, but communication is not a one-way thing. It's not just us speaking or us communicating. So there is a great power in listening as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, there's the old phrase, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's the thing that people often say, so listen twice as much. I think what's more important, what I would emphasize is taking time to absorb what the other people are saying. Don't rush to judgment. Don't make assumptions. Always make sure that you fully understand what's being said to you as far as you possibly can, and take a moment to respond. I think one of the great flaws in communication, whether it's on the media or on stage or in panel discussions, is that people are in too much of a hurry to get their response over. They've decided what they're going to say long in advance of the question being finished, and I think it's a tragedy, really, because it means that communication doesn't really happen. What you've got is people over here going blah blah blah, people over there going blah 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 blah, and there isn't any communication. It's just two people saying what they think without listening to what the other person said.
Yeah, and also before you gave a great tip when it comes to maybe receiving or answering a tough question or a hostile question. Now, this is not just about questions. Sometimes, I'm sure you've experienced it as a public speaker yourself. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we do have, let's say, maybe a difficult audience, or maybe one member in the audience who could be a bit tough or difficult. Any other tips or suggestions for handling that kind of situation?
Yes. I would say one other thing that's very important is never take it personally. Even if the question maybe has a personal aspect to it, ignore it. Don't take it personally. Don't try and defend yourself. Never try and insult the questioner under any circumstances. And I always imagine a kind of triangle. So I've got me, probably on stage or on camera, the person asking the question, and the issue is the third point of the triangle. So we are now both talking about an issue, which is over there. It's not me, it's not them. We're talking about a point, and we're both referring to that point. And I think as soon as you allow that to become personal, as soon as it's a line rather than a triangle, then you can get into serious difficulty, because then it becomes a personal attack on them, and they want to defend themselves, and then it escalates. And once it's escalated, you've lost. So it's a classic negotiation principle, isn't it? We're always talking about the third thing in the room. We're never talking about each other. It's always what's the issue over there.
Yeah. And what if things go wrong? Not in this particular scenario, in general. So we've been talking about the importance of preparation, TV appearances, radio interviews, panel discussions. Let's say that we've prepared well. We know what our core message is. We have a very good idea in terms of how things are going to happen in that particular show or interview or whatever it is, but then they don't go as planned. Any suggestions there?
Yeah. Firstly, things always go wrong. The most perfect preparation can be foiled by something which can just occur. And I think that one thing is it comes with experience. So, the more experience that you get communicating on stage, on TV, radio, the better you are able to cope with things. For one reason, you'll have seen them before, so you know what happens. But secondly, you'll be confident in your own ability. And I think that's really what it comes back to. I think all of this comes back to inner confidence, comes back to having not an arrogance, but a certainty that your message is valuable, that you know what to do, that even if, supposing the microphones have crashed or something's gone horribly wrong, or you've had a delay or whatever it is, you've just got to try and remove yourself from that, stay calm and think, well, when it comes to my turn, I'll be fine. And even if it never comes to your turn, that's fine as well. I remember I used to do a radio show on a London radio station some years ago with a great friend of mine. And we came bouncing into work one day. It was a 2-hour show. We were co-presenters. We came bouncing into work, and we were stopped. There was a person put his hand up as we tried to step into the studio, and we said, "What's the matter?" And they said, "They found Saddam Hussein. Go home." Because obviously everything had switched to the news about what was happening over there. So we actually went to a coffee bar and just did the 2-hour show to ourselves. It was there was nothing else we could do. Nobody ever heard it.
And Alan, also, I would like to go back to something that you touched at the very beginning of our conversation, which is in a way, the importance of you talked about the background not being distracting, these kind of things. So in general, let's talk about the overall setup, also from a technological perspective, because particularly today, now we are recording this, what is it today, the 7th of June. So still today we are in the middle of this COVID situation. So most communication is still happening online. So I don't know what you think about it, Alan, but I think that technology doesn't make a huge difference when it comes to face-to-face communication. But online, we need to be more careful. We need to, of course, for obvious reasons, we need to rely more on technology. So for our listeners, do you have any tips for improving our setup from a technological perspective without breaking the bank, though, if possible?
That's a very good question, and I do have a response to you. And it's a question I often get asked, actually, because I also run a large Facebook group called Remote Speaking, where a lot of people, I think it's 2,500 speakers and communicators in there who offer each other advice. I set the group up just over a year ago. A bit of luck, really, and a lot of people have joined in. And the advice I would give people is I could say, you know, for a couple of £100, couple of €100, you can have a very good and efficient setup. And I would say one of the most important things is getting a decent external microphone. These things are not, I'm not going to give trade names or anything like that out, but you can get a very good external microphone, which does improve on the quality of the microphone, usually in a laptop or a desktop. Lighting can be quite important as well, particularly if you're doing events during darkness. And you can get a couple, I use Studio Floods, which are large lights with a sort of muslin front. And again, not very expensive. So I think provided you've got decent lighting, and you might want to use a backdrop. Some people will use a plain backdrop. I mean, if you've got an office backdrop, as we both appear to have at the moment, then I think you're going to be fine. But sometimes, and this is something I'm not in favour of, people want to use a green screen, for example. I always think they look weird, particularly with the kind of power that we have in our homes, and you get this halo around your head, and when you move, your fingers disappear. And I'm never very keen on that. Yeah. But I think you can get a nice plain white backdrop, which is easily done, or you can get a plain green if you want to do a little bit of green screen. The whole lot, a couple of £100, couple of €100, and that will give you a very, very efficient setup. You might want to get a webcam. There are some good webcams around, but quite often the webcam which is in a laptop or a desktop is of reasonable enough quality. The sound is the key, I always think. I think if you've got good sound, then you can forgive not such great video. The other way around, it doesn't work.
I agree, 100%. And Alan, do you have any great examples or role models if you think about, let's say, communication in general? Maybe somebody who's great at hosting certain kinds of events, or maybe answering questions or speaking in public. Again, I'm sure that you have maybe many names in mind, but anyone in particular?
I'll give you two names. One historic, who sadly passed, and one which is current, who's greatly still with us. The historic one, and this is a name that some people will know if they're cricket fans, is Alistair Cook. It's not Alistair Cook the cricketer. It's somebody called Alistair Cook, who was a journalist from Manchester. He moved to America just after the Second World War, and he produced something called Letter from America, a 15-minute show every Saturday morning for 52 years. And that explained America to people in Britain. He lived in New York. For a short while, he was my mentor. And I thought he was one of the most wonderful journalists. And he gave me a piece of advice as a journalist, which is my background. And he said, Alan, never miss a deadline, never waste a word. And I thought, that's a great, and that's been in my head ever since, every day ever since. Never miss a deadline, never waste a word. So I thought that was great advice. So Alistair Cook, great communicator, and you can listen to some of his broadcasts on the BBC website. If you go to the BBC website and put in Letter from America, it's wonderful. And the one I would urge people to listen to, and this is slightly distressing, but it is one of the most wonderful pieces of journalism. He was in the hotel where Bobby Kennedy was shot. He was with him. He was in his party at the time, and he delivered what you would call a podcast these days, a 15-minute radio show, a few days after the event, while he was still recovering himself. And for me, it's one of the most extraordinary pieces of journalism I've ever heard. So that's on the website. And the current one, which may surprise you, is Graham Norton. Graham Norton. And the reason I select Graham Norton is because of what's happening to us right now, the fact that we're going to have a live audience in a room and a remote audience who are streaming in. And that I think is going to be the model that many of us as communicators are going to be using for some years to come, the hybrid model or the blended model, if you want to call it that. And for me, one of the most expert people around in dealing with a live studio audience and a remote audience on television is Graham Norton. I think he's absolutely brilliant at bringing both the audience, and he's got a panel as well, so he's a panel debate. So he's monitoring a panel, he's communicating with the live audience in the studio, and he's communicating with the remote audience at home. And that triple talent, I think, is something we should all watch very carefully, because that's a lot of what we're going to be needing to do over the next few years.
What does he do to get these triple right? Anything in particular?
Again, he uses singular language, as we talked about early on. So it's very much about using singular language, but it's about slightly dividing his attention so that it's going to the panel, it's then referring to somebody in the audience, and very quickly looking down the camera to refer to somebody at home. So, and doing all of that within about 10 seconds. So in other words, you're literally keeping everybody on board all of the time. And I don't know whether he does it on purpose or whether he's just learned to do it and does it naturally or instinctively, but he's utterly brilliant.
And it's very difficult to do that, to get the triple right. Yeah. And Alan, you said that your background is in journalism.
Yes.
So one of the chapters in your book, again, the Poker Media Coach, is something like, if I remember well, thinking like a journalist. Yeah. And so you say that if you want to improve your media skills, say that it could be a CEO or you are a business professional, a politician, you are invited to speak at this kind of events, you need to learn to think like a journalist.
You do.
How does a journalist think?
Great question. A journalist will often think in stories, not facts. Facts are important because facts allow us to provide evidence that we can support a story with. But it's the story that's the key. And if you listen to the great speakers, as I'm sure you have, then you know that they tell stories. And if you listen to any great orator, they will tell stories. They won't do it all the time. Sometimes they're using pure rhetoric, but quite often they will be using storytelling techniques and referring to very, very specific examples. So one thing that journalists often want is a story. They also want something that's going to be of interest to their viewers, listeners, readers, and that is it local interest? Is it relevance? Is it associated with a celebrity? What's the hook? So you're always, as well as the story, what is the hook? What is the thing that they're going to use for people to latch onto? What's the headline when they preview a story? What's it going to be about? And I think if you think about those things, then if you start thinking in that way, then you will be a perfect interviewee because you will understand what's required of you. And journalists, of which I am one, we sometimes have to work very hard indeed to get information out of an interviewee, because some people come on air thinking, oh, they're not going to get me to say that, and I'm not going to say that, and whatever they do, I'm not going to say. And you think, well, this is pointless, because if somebody goes into an interview situation thinking, here's what I'm not going to say, they're not going to do anything useful. They're not going to say anything useful because all the time they're thinking, I mustn't say this, I mustn't say that. You've got to flip that completely.
Yeah.
You've got to go out there and say, what story am I going to tell? What impression am I going to leave? What value can I possibly provide?
People remember stories much more than facts and figures. Yeah.
They do.
Yeah. Alan, let's talk about, this is one of the last questions that I always like to ask, and it's mainly for me, for like personal knowledge. I love reading, and in addition to the Poker Media Coach, you've written many other books. Mm-hmm. But out there, in addition to your books, if you think about everything we've talked about today, it could be communication in general, public speaking, presentations, media skills. Is there one book that you would really recommend?
May I give you two?
Sure.
Okay. One book that I'm going to recommend is called Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. I don't know if you know the book. Blake Snyder, who I met out in America, was a scriptwriter, film producer, sadly died a few years ago. And Save the Cat is about how the story of a film is divided up into different, what he called beats. He talks about the 13 beats of a film: the opening, the closing, the transformation, the dark night of the soul, the bad guys move in. And he gave each one of these a name. And I think it applies to almost any story. It's a brilliant exposition of how to create a story. Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. I won't explain what the title means. If somebody buys it or you buy it, you'll understand.
I will buy it 100% for sure. So thank you for the recommendation.
And the other one that I want to recommend, if I may, is by a relative of mine, my sixth great's aunt, Mary, and she wrote a book called Frankenstein. Mary Shelley was my sixth great's aunt, and for me, obviously because it's a family, so I would, but I think it's a wonderful piece of storytelling. And as you know, it's been turned into various films through the years, but I go back to the original book that she wrote. It's a much longer story than the story that you've ever seen. The bit that you see in the film is the last chapter, actually. And it's a little bit tough to read. It's a Victorian novel. So it's very wordy. But for me, the descriptions are so powerful and the story is so strong. I mean, it's got a visceral aspect to it. So for storytelling, I always recommend people read Frankenstein. We don't get royalties on it anymore, unfortunately. But
great. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the recommendations, Alan. And is there anything else as we approach the conclusion of our conversation? Is there either a final message that you would like to share with the listeners, or maybe is there a question that you would have liked me to ask you and I didn't do it? And anything else? Any final message for our audience?
I think you've asked some wonderful questions. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to talk to you today. It really has. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Because I'm often on the other side. I'm often the interviewer rather than interviewee. And this has been an absolute pleasure for me. In terms of a final piece of advice, I think the only advice that I would give to people is think very, very hard what you're trying to communicate, and really stop and think, what am I trying to say? How can I make it as simple as possible? The rule of thumb that I always give people is, imagine you're speaking to an 11-year-old. I'm sure you've heard the same sort of thing. Imagine you're speaking to an 11-year-old. It's not patronizing. 11-year-olds are quite smart. But if you use vocabulary and you use tonality, which an 11-year-old would understand, that is the perfect level for communication with almost any audience.
Love it. Great piece of advice, which goes back to what we said at the very beginning. We need to be able to simplify a message. You say also in your book that simplicity is one of the key characteristics of a core message. Alan, thank you very much. I also enjoyed this conversation so much, and I've learned a lot, including the book recommendations, and I'm sure that our listeners have learned a lot as well. Thank you very much again, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you very much indeed.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com, or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.